So, hi there. We actually got this to work, which is pretty cool. I hope everybody can hear us now. So we're here at the beautiful USC campus, University of Southern California, with Mr. Joseph Tepperman. For those of you that attend Pasadena regularly, you'll recognize Joe. He's a regular attendee, a regular Spalo, one who prays with us all the time. I hope you can all hear us properly. I don't know if this is loud enough. It is a little bit distant from us, but hopefully we're doing okay. What do you say?
We'll just have to shout.
Yeah, exactly. Or talk a little loudly. And the reason we're here today is to sort of interview Joe and get a little bit of a sneak preview for his upcoming lecture, which is AI in Talmudic Lore and Jewish Thought. And for those of you that are not aware, AI stands for artificial intelligence. And Mr. Joseph Tepperman has a double background, which sort of, like I was joking before, gives you the credentials to give this talk. So in addition to, I'll read his sort of small bio here, which is Joseph Tepperman has a PhD, has taught automatic speech recognition at USC and UC Boulder. He actually not only has, but actually this morning, right? You gave a class here?
This morning, yes, from 9 to noon.
What's the topic of your class this morning?
Automatic speech recognition.
Oh, really? Okay, so there we go. Automatic speech recognition at USC and UC Boulder. He's currently a senior researcher at Sensory, which is a company that contributes speech technology, which is used by companies such as Amazon, Samsung. So you might have heard of Amazon Alexa, Echo. Samsung has its own virtual assistant, and AT&T. He holds 3 patents and has published 30 research papers. And that's sort of his background on speech recognition, artificial intelligence, and this sort of thing. One of the things that's coolest to me, which is why I thought you had so many amazing credentials to give this talk, is that you also do Daf Yomi, right? So for those of you that are not familiar, Daf Yomi is a program where over the course of a 7-year period, an individual will go through the entire Shas, or the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, together with the Gemara. So the famous Talmud, which you may have heard of, the Talmud, all the sages talk about the Talmud. This is a 7-year program where by learning one page, that's a double-sided page of Talmud with commentary, it's quite an achievement. It's quite a goal to have every day, as I'm sure you can attest to.
Certainly is a goal.
And the idea is to, over a 7-year period, finish the entire Talmud and all of, well, not all of its commentary, but some commentary that will give you that sort of idea. So he has both an extensive, Talmudic background, as well as an extensive artificial intelligence background, speech recognition. And so he'll be giving this talk, Artificial Intelligence, Talmudic Lore, and Jewish Thought. But the idea is sort of to give us a peek into some of the big questions in the artificial intelligence community today, the speech recognition, the automatic speech recognition, the availability for machines to talk back to us. I have in my home a Google Home Mini. I know that's not one of the ones you worked on, but and you can talk to it, and it's almost creepily can talk back to you. And sort of what are the implications on modern halacha, etc. Those of you that are just tuning in, this is Mr. Joseph Tepperman, and he'll be giving this talk called Artificial Intelligence in Talmudic Lore and Jewish Thought at the Pasadena Jewish Academy. The date is March 31st. It's a Sunday, I believe, right?
Yep.
At 7 p.m. Please join us. It's $10 per person. If you'd like to help sponsor the event, it's $180. So without further ado, I'm just going to go double check that this is working. Okay. We're not talking to nobody. That's what the machines are for, right? And then we'll be right back with some questions with Joseph Tepperman. Seems good. We have a couple people watching as well. All right. If you guys have any questions, I will definitely come back and we'll address some of those questions. But for now, I'll start off with the questions. So, Joe, let's start off. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And I guess let's start off a little bit about your Jewish journey. How you got into Daf Yomi, etc. You didn't grow up religious?
I was religious,
okay.
of a certain sort. Because, we had kashrus at home and Pesach, and we certainly lit candles on Shabbos. So.
Okay, yeah. So definitely there was Judaism in the home.
Absolutely.
Shabbos was kept?
Not exactly. To an extent.
Okay.
And all of my life I heard rabbis making references to Pirkei Avos and to Gemara and other things that sounded fascinating, but I didn't know very many people who personally could teach me about it. And so at some point, I had heard so many references to it that I said, I have to actually look into this for myself.
Right, so and that's what got you started on Daf Yomi?
Yes, specifically Daf Yomi, a good friend of mine who's an attorney of California civil law had gotten into reading Daf Yomi, and I had been reading a little bit of Medrash and some other things, and at first I wasn't sure that I could handle Daf Yomi, and it just it was seductive. Torah is very seductive.
I will definitely agree.
Yeah, I
You
remember,
learn a little bit, you want to know more.
Absolutely, and it was not at all what I expected. It was a completely different way of looking at the world, a different way of thinking. But it felt right. It felt like I could own it. So yeah.
All right. And you're doing Daf Yomi now for how many years?
It's been about almost 5 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2 more years and you're done.
Every day it feels like I'm beginning again.
You're starting again. Okay, have you done today's Daf yet?
No.
I guess today's a Friday, so you have Shabbos to do that.
Yeah.
I usually catch you doing it between Mincha and Ma'ariv in a shul.
Yeah.
You'll be sitting and learning the Daf, which, as we mentioned before, is the program where you learn one double-sided page of Gemara every single day, of the Talmud, the famous Talmud every single day. So that's a little bit of your, I guess, your Jewish background and your Talmudic background. Why don't you give us a little bit of your artificial intelligence background and sort of, I'm assuming you started this pursuit when you were in college?
Yes, I went to USC for a number of
Really?
years.
Right here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's. I actually went to USC for 10 years because I got a bachelor's, master's, PhD.
Mm-hmm.
And it started off. I didn't really know what I was actually a music student at first, and switched to electrical engineering. And at some point, I realized that there was this thing called speech recognition, which you could study formally, which I had no idea. You know, back in
It crossed your two passions, music and electrical engineering.
Yeah. And I met my advisor, Sri Narayanan, who ended up being my PhD thesis advisor, and as soon as I learned a little bit about that, I said, that's exactly what I've been wanting to study this whole time without even knowing it. A little bit like Daf Yomi.
Okay. This is how many years ago?
This was about 15 years ago.
Wow, okay, a little bit before you got into Daf Yomi.
A little bit.
So, 15 years ago, I think it's safe to say that the artificial intelligence community, the speech recognition community, was a little bit underdeveloped. It was a little bit behind where we are today.
I used to tell people what I was working on, and they would say, "Oh, you do that? I hate that. It never works. It never gets my accent." And now, when I tell people what I do, they say, "Oh, that's great. I use it to write a text message in the car, or everything."
Absolutely, yeah, sure. All the time when I'm driving, I use my phone to talk to it, and I use the speech recognition, and I'll even sometimes not even touch the phone. You just say, I have the Google Pixel, so I'll be like, okay, Google, and then, I hope I didn't actually activate it now, but and I'll say, send a text message to this person and write this. And one of my favorite personal things to do, talking about the cross-reference between Judaism and artificial intelligence, is to say things like Shabbat Shalom or Chabad of Pasadena, whatever it is, and see if it gets it. And very often it does, actually. Yes. The other day I said shul and it said show. You know, but you give it a little bit. We've still got a margin of error, but we've definitely come a very, very long way. I do remember some of the early versions of speech recognition. Yes, they were horrible. It was like it must have been such a frustrating field at the beginning. Okay, enough about that. Yeah. So tell us where you are now. So now you teach at USC.
Teach at USC, but only part-time. I'm sharing a class with my former advisor, who's still a professor here, Sri Narayanan. And I mostly work for a company called Sensory that no one has ever heard of, but we license our stuff out to many different places.
So you're saying Amazon and Samsung, they get the glitzy PR and the publicity, and you guys sort of do all the hard work.
Well, they have a mix of different sources for where they get their technology.
Right, okay.
We're one of them.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough, and I guess that's your main competition. In other words, you want to stay the source of technology or at least one of the sources of technology for Amazon, et cetera, because they're an amazing client at it. In other words, in other words, that's your goal. They shop around between.
Yeah, we're always being tested against our competitors to see, and Sensory, for such a small company, we have only 60 employees or something. It's very competitive. So.
Okay, very cool. So I guess let's start with the artificial intelligence community and speech recognition. To you, what is like one of the biggest moral? Because there's lots of ways that you can sort of attack artificial intelligence, but talking from a standpoint of morality and ethics, what do you think is one of the most ambiguous questions that exist in the world? And we're not going to answer it today. That's going to be people have to come to the class for that. But what do you think is one of the most ambiguous or hard-pressed questions that there are today in the artificial intelligence community, or whether it's specifically speech recognition or just in general. You know, artificial intelligence touches on so many things. And then we have autonomous cars, and we have, I mean, even your phone is, I mean, your landline is essentially a form of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The one topic that everyone wants to talk about and that I know the least about is self-driving cars.
Okay.
Because if they work, they would be so useful, and yet there's the potential for so much damage. And everyone is interested to know the morality of self-driving cars. How does it decide if it has to swerve to avoid killing somebody? How does it know which way to swerve? It's a very interesting topic, and I know almost nothing about it, but I would love for there to be self-driving cars, and I hope that in my lifetime there will be, because I hate driving, especially in Los Angeles.
I think everybody in California can agree with that.
Yeah, if people compare it to elevator operators, there used to be in the day, there was someone who had a full-time job to operate an elevator in a building, and now we have elevators that operate on their own, so we don't need it anymore.
Which is an amazing thing. That would definitely be an amazing future.
But the people who love cars would be very disappointed.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, they can still love cars. They can still be an antique, you know. Which is there are people that have elevators as a hobby. They collect elevators, old-fashioned elevators. So let me ask you different questions. So if that's the topics you're not going to be talking about, because that's not where you feel you have the expertise, give us a little bit of a glimpse into some of the exciting things that you will be talking about. Again, for those of you that are just joining us, Joe will be giving a class, or not a class, more like a lecture and a full presentation. We actually just went through it here. I should mention to people, we're on the grounds at USC here on the campus, and we've just gone through his full presentation, which is almost complete, which is really, really neat. And I personally, there were so many things, we obviously only glossed over, there's so many things that I would like to hear about more in detail that I'm looking forward to. But Joe is going to be giving that talk. It's called AI in Talmudic Lore and Jewish Thought at Chabad of Pasadena, at the Pasadena Jewish Academy on Sunday, March 31st at 7 o'clock in the evening. There will be refreshments there. It'll be exciting. He has a full presentation prepared, and Joe is just an awesome guy to meet in person. So I encourage you all to join us. So if you're not going to talk about self-driving cars, what will you be talking about?
It's now possible to, just using some audio clips of a celebrity's voice, you can now fake that person's voice and make them say things that they never actually said. And it sounds completely believable to most human ears. And it has the potential to do a lot of damage, because you could take a famous political figure and make them say something controversial and reprehensible. You could take, if we have audio clips of yourself, you could make me, if you have enough audio, you could train machine learning to sound just like me and make me say things that I would never say. So this the potential to do damage, but also the potential to do interesting things with this is enormous. I think we're only just scratching the surface of it as a culture, and so in the next few years we'll see where this all leads. But everybody is excited and terrified.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not, well, I was excited before when we spoke at the coffee shop here at USC, but now I'm a little bit terrified, because when you mentioned that just with audio clips, that's something you can do. As a rabbi and as an educator, I have a YouTube channel with lots of my Torah classes online. There's definitely a sampling of my voice out there, and the thought that somebody can call my wife or sort of program a computer to call my wife and say, hey honey, where are you? That's a little bit freaky.
Very dangerous.
And maybe I should start wearing one of those from the movies. They have those voice alterations every time I give a class. You know, like I'm in the clear. That's definitely very exciting, and that is right. That you had mentioned that's something that's going to be addressed in your class. Other things that Joe is going to talk about in his class are the golem.
Is some of you, even though you're in high school, are probably already thinking about
post-undergraduate passing by. Hold on 1 second. We don't want to interrupt them. We don't want them to interrupt you guys from hearing us. There's about 10-15 people watching. Nice. So at least the last time I checked. Hi there. For those of you that are just joining us, this is Joseph Tepperman. He is a PhD and a professor here at USC, part-time. He also works at a company called Sensory, which is behind some of the artificial intelligence, speech recognition of popular products that you might have heard of at Amazon, at Samsung, Amazon Alexa, Echo, etc. So a little bit from the Jewish perspective now, right? So obviously, Amazon Alexa or Google Assistant or whatever it is didn't exist in the times of the Talmud. So where have you, you've done a lot of research, we went through your class. What have you done in preparing for this class? Where have you gone? What sort of got you started on that? What was the impetus for the Torah review on this? Obviously, I know you bring some modern, contemporary Jewish scholars, even some that are alive today, or even as recent as Moshe Feinstein, a famous halachic ruler of the 20th century, I guess, not 21st. But in terms of just the Talmud and going back to the Talmud, where have you found parallels to the discussion on artificial intelligence and speech recognition that there is in today's community?
In the Talmud, Masechet Sanhedrin, there's a discussion of magic and the Torah prohibition of magic. And in the context of magic, it brings this very famous story of a rabbi of the Amora generation named Rava, that he created an artificial man using the powers of the Hebrew letters. Now, what is the nature of this artificial man? Was it a robot? Was it a puppet? Was it some type of optical illusion? There are various theories about this, but essentially he created an artificial man, sent it as a shliach to another rabbi. The other rabbi, Reb Zera, tried to speak to this artificial man, and he couldn't speak back, and that was the clue that told Reb Zera, oh, this is not an actual person that I'm speaking to. This is an artificial creation. So this was written 1,500 years ago when the Gemara was first compiled, and just incredible the foresight that they were already talking about artificial intelligence and engaging with the possibility that humans could create artificial humans, and also there's this. I was really fascinated to see that there's no concern with taking any power away from Hashem's authority or anything like that. That creating this artificial man is seen almost as like an act that only the highest tzaddikim are able to pull off. So
that would be an interesting point. In other words, the fact that a human being would be able to create, I guess, ideally, well, not ideally. I mean, really, it's very scary, but. At its ultimate, a human being would be able to create another human being. That would be the idea, with complete artificial intelligence that actually would mimic our intelligence. That does sound very, godly-like in nature, and something that maybe Torah would have a perspective on, being kafira or heretical to our beliefs that only God can create the world or create man or whatever it is. Yeah. Very interesting. That does sound like an interesting question. So I have a question for you. Do you think that we as the Jewish people have a right to a copyright lawsuit against some of these companies? Because we really, I mean, Rava started years ago, and what do you think? Do we have a chance fighting in court? Absolutely. I know you're not a lawyer.
No, I mean, so it's actually, there are other parallels in other ancient traditions. I'm not as familiar with it, but I know that there are some other cases of talking statues in other ancient stories. But I know that in Gemara and some of the Rishonim that have talked about this, that the concern with is it human, is it artificial, that's very, very far-reaching, and as early as 300 years ago, 400 years ago, that rabbis were already asking the question, can this artificial man mentioned in the Gemara, can it count for a minion? Can it be considered a human in some respects? And
can it chef, right? Was one of the questions. Can it slaughter an animal?
Yes, and then would the animal be kosher?
Right.
So for a creation that none of us would ever expect to see, they're already asking very, very deep, very, very difficult questions that finally, in our day, have some practical application.
Yeah. So that's interesting. It's always interesting to see something that the Gemara spoke about years ago, which maybe for thousands of years Jews learned as sort of this theoretical or interesting part of the Gemara, where it was just a conversation, and all of a sudden we here at Pasadena Jewish Academy, our goal is to teach people Torah. All of a sudden we're going back to that conversation and saying now it's a very practical conversation. Now it's something we're actually very interested in. I have a question for you, but before I ask it, I'm actually going to ask the audience. If anybody's watching now live and has a question for Joe, and we're just recording this on my phone, but I can go around to the other side and take a look at some of the questions, and I'm sure Joe would be happy to try and answer them. Or we can just tell you, great question, come on March 31st to the talk. But I have a question for you. So if you have a question, please type it into the chat box. But I have a question for you, Joe, as follows. So you mentioned that one of the main conversations you went back to, I know you started talking about the Golem, but it starts the conversation on magic, which is actually something, and this is not the contemporary word for magic, which in today's age is usually sleight of hand, but actual magic, which means speaking to the dead, or actually using the forces of Kalipa or the forces of impurity to do things against nature, which is not allowed, which is prohibited as after the Torah. There are actually a number of transgressions. There's one of them called a Me'onein, another one called, right, etc. You mentioned that, and obviously a lot of artificial intelligence today's day and age does seem magical, but I don't know that that's a topic that many of the people in the artificial intelligence community are discussing, whether this is magic or not. Obviously, it seems magical, but I'm curious in terms of fooling someone else, which is obviously always the goal of magic, etc. I've always heard of Alan Turing and the Turing test. And I did watch the movie The Imitation Game, which I'm sure many of you have watched, which is a great movie and talks about this, it's about Alan Turing, etc. But I'm curious that this concept of fooling someone else and that being sort of a barometer. First of all, can you tell us a little bit about what the I don't know the exact definition, but what is the Turing test, and how does that tie into fooling someone else and that being a barometer for what is or isn't artificial intelligence?
Okay, so Alan Turing, in a famous paper from the 50s, actually, which was very ahead of its time because computers at that time were rather primitive, he asked the question, can machines think? And he proposed the following answer to that question, or to a variant of that question, that maybe there was a party game at the time in the 50s called the Imitation Game, where you would put a man and a woman in behind a door, and one of them, and they would have to ask questions from the people on the other side of the door. Sorry, they would have to answer questions from people on the other side of the door. And based on their answers to the questions, they would have to see, like, can they fool people into thinking that the man is a woman or that the woman is a man, and so on. So Alan Turing was thinking, well, what if machines and humans would play this kind of imitation game, where a machine is trying to fool a human listener, a human interrogator into thinking that it's human. And he was of the opinion, through this paper, that it would be a type of intelligence, maybe not thinking on the level as a human, but we could think of that as a model of some type of human-like intelligence, that people were able to be fooled by the machine, that there's something going on with the machine that's more complex than what ordinary machines are able to do.
Right. Now, is this something that any company to date has actually been able to accomplish?
Many times, yes.
Many times.
Actually, going back to the 1970s.
Wow. In the 1970s, someone was able to is
yes.
that because the human being was foolish, or is that because the...
It's probably, it speaks less to the quality of the chatbots and more to how easily duped humans are. So one of the examples that I heard about was somebody made a chatbot, and the whole premise of the chatbot was that it was a 13-year-old Ukrainian who's not a native speaker of English. And so if they made grammatical mistakes, and
it was sort of accepted by the human being because
yes.
there was this earlier premise that you don't speak English.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah, it sort of reminds you of those spam emails that you get where they tell you you're a Nigerian prince, and the English is so horrible, you're like, that's your dead giveaway right there.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I actually saw, I once saw an article about a reverse Turing test, sort of that some of these scams, if anybody's ever wondered why, and I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to you, but have you ever wondered why some of these scams seem so absurdly obvious and that only the most gullible person in the world would believe them? So I've heard that that's actually sort of a reverse Turing test, that the idea is that they want to sort of filter out anybody with intelligence that they're not going to be able to do. The second step is they want your social security number or your money or whatever it is. And in order to get to that stage and filter out all of you, because we all ignore those emails. I hope you ignore any emails from Nigerian princes. And anybody out there, please ignore any emails from Nigerian princes, and know that everyone is safe and doing well. You know, then they don't need your social security card in order to get out of Taiwan. But so I guess by proposing that, they sort of filter out anybody with even a basic level of, you know,
yes.
and maybe they're sort of preying on the elderly who have no knowledge of technology, or even just people that are a lot more gullible than the rest of us. And by doing that, they sort of filter them all out, and now they can harness in on those people. If anybody responds to that, they're already sort of have potential to be scammed into whatever the following step is. So that's interesting.
Yeah, so
cool.
It's a reverse, because the Turing test is you want to fool someone into thinking that the machine is intelligent. This is, you're trying to fool the human being into thinking that it's not intelligent.
I guess,
yeah.
And I don't know, it just seemed to parallel in my mind.
Absolutely.
A lot of these points are actually very, very interesting. I'm just going to go to the camera for a second and we'll check if there are any questions. But just as a reminder, we're doing this sort of as a promo, a little bit of a pre, you know, on Shabbat, today's Friday. On Friday, one of the laws of Shabbat is that we say you should taste the food before Shabbat, so get a taste of what it's like. So today we're doing a taste of, in 10 days' time, Joe will be giving a talk, here is the flyer, on artificial intelligence and Talmudic Lore and Jewish Thought. And that's what we've been talking about. If anybody's watching this video after it's live, you can go back to the beginning and listen from the beginning. We encourage you all to join us. It's on Sunday, March 31st at 7 o'clock in the PM, 7 o'clock in the evening. Hosted at the Pasadena Jewish Academy at 1090 East Walnut Street. And the entry fee is $10 per person. We'll definitely be refreshments there, and you'll get to meet Joe in person, which is really cool because Joe is a really neat guy. Now we'll go to questions from the camera, and then we'll call it a day because Shabbat is coming, and I'm sure many people over there as well as myself have to get home and get ready for Shabbat. We got to taste that food, right?
That's right.
I was like, they're usually here. There's tons of them here and also in Founders Park. You're going to get there. So I was about to say this is one of the best places to have lunch, but it is sort of squirrel prone. So you'll get a lot of them trying to steal your food.
So just hold with us for 1 second. There's another tour going by of the campus. I do have a question here. Actually, that somebody texted me privately, so hold on 1 second. Okay, so somebody texted me privately. They want to know as follows. In terms of the golem, right, and comparing that, because we had mentioned the golem earlier, and Rava Baragavra, etc., isn't that considered something to do with the Kabbalah, and isn't it a Kabbalistic thing, and so therefore maybe not artificial intelligence? And wondering your thoughts on that.
Yes, there's a huge difference between the golem and modern artificial intelligence, and that difference is that the golem was created using the powers of the Hebrew letters, and in particular, there's one of the oldest books of Kabbalah, Sefer Yetzirah, and modern artificial intelligence is not quite at that level. However, there is in the Gemara and in some of the other Shulchan Aruch and some of the halakhic sources, the opinion that the golem was a type of optical illusion. And once you get into some of the halakhas of an optical illusion, for example, an optical illusion is permitted if you make it with Sefer Yetzirah, or if you create it without any intent to deceive, and there's no possibility to deceive someone through the illusion, then it's permitted according to halakha. So in light of the golem, and that the golem was created with Sefer Yetzirah, and the connection to illusions, maybe halakhically, I'm not a rabbi, I'm not a poskim on this, but like you could see in that context that there's some connection between modern artificial intelligence and the halakha of optical illusions. And so that's if there's anything new in this talk that I'm trying to bring, it's this connection that maybe if we see modern artificial intelligence as a lesser form of an optical illusion, then maybe some of the same concern with deception would apply.
Very interesting. So in other words, if somebody were to actually pass the Alan Turing test, even to a proper, right, maybe not the most intellectual person in the world, but a proper intellect, a person of average intelligence, if they were actually to pass the Alan Turing test and actually imitate a human being and tell them that, in other words, your question is, does it fall into the category of Shalom La'onein, which is not to deceive another person, Gnevas Das, stealing another person's integrity or another person's innocence or vulnerability, etc., which I guess is a similar question. I mean, obviously the scammers that scam in the email, which we mentioned before, obviously they're violating many things in Allah, but maybe the first one is even just telling you they're a Nigerian prince, and that's not really true. Perhaps not allowed according to halacha, and maybe that even ties, by the way. That's an interesting conversation because I would love to see how that connects maybe to things beyond artificial intelligence, maybe between two human beings.
Absolutely.
I mean, I know in the dating world, very often people are pretending to be who they aren't, and maybe sometimes it's just an exaggeration of the fact. Maybe sometimes they're actually adding something to their online profile which is completely untrue about themselves, and perhaps that goes into the same category. So that's interesting. So you're saying that that's sort of the parallel between artificial intelligence, where almost your goal, one perspective looking at it is your goal is to dupe the other person. Your goal is to make the other person think that the machine is a human being. Perhaps that is a form, I guess, on the programmer's end.
Yes.
Of violating the prohibition of magic and illusions that are very interesting. Okay. Thank you very much, Joe, for joining us today.
Thank you, Zushi. It's a pleasure.
We'll just plug one more time. So we're here today at USC, and the goal of this interview was just to give you a sort of preview as to who Joe is and some of his perspectives and his credentials for the upcoming class, which is Artificial Intelligence in Talmudic Lore and Jewish Thought. We're going to touch on some of the moralities of it, how it ties into Jewish law, how it ties into Jewish lore as well, right? Talmudic lore, so Jewish halacha, from a halachic perspective, also a little bit on the Gemara and what the Talmud has to say about it, and sort of historically. And we will see you there. The date is Sunday, March 31st, 2019, and the time is 7 p.m. And by the end of the evening, hopefully we'll have a proper lawsuit put together against Amazon and Google to sort of... that's it. Rava did it way before them. The Talmud spoke about this way before this. Let's gain some knowledge based on Torah and artificial intelligence. Thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you.
We look forward to the talk. See you all there. Please make your reservations online. The website is PasadenaJewishAcademy.com/AI, which stands for Artificial Intelligence. Again, the website is PasadenaJewishAcademy.com/AI. The cost is $10 per person. You can RSVP in advance, or just show up at the door. Refreshments will be served, and Joe will be there in person. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.